I do want to share a bit that I, on my own personal journey, even though I did the confinement diet, I wasn't 100% strict on it because I felt like I needed to do things that worked for me.
Exactly.
So like I said, I didn't follow fully the whole, like eating rice for 2 meals a day. And actually I needed cereal and bread in the morning. So I would have that, but make sure it was warmed up. If I really needed a bar of chocolate, even though I shouldn't have, and a bag of crisps, I would have it, but then I'd be back on my confinement. And during the time that I was on my confinement, I felt so well within because I was sticking generally to a very good diet.
Welcome to the Motherhood Clinic, a podcast about caring for mothers after childbirth, led by clinical experience and real life stories. If you're a new mom and ever asked yourself, is what I'm going through normal? Should I be worried? Or who should I ask for help? This podcast is for you. It's for anyone navigating those early weeks, months, or even years after having a baby. Each episode brings together voices from across the motherhood journey, from clinicians, experts, and mothers from all walks of life. We're here to help you feel more empowered in your unique motherhood journey. We believe in a better start to motherhood.
Welcome, Lucy, to the second episode
Thank you.
of this mini-series.
Thanks for having me.
So in the first one, we talked about an introduction to confinement, what it is, why do people do it, and how did you come to confinement. What we wanted to do in this episode is talk a bit more specifically about key concepts and the foods that fit into those concepts. Yeah. That's going to be the focus of today.
Yeah.
But before we jump into that, we were talking about observations that we've seen in different countries. And we mentioned things like, from my experience, I've seen in Korea that they actually have hotels that are dedicated to new mothers where you book yourself in for a week or two.
Or the whole month.
Mm-hmm. And that focus is just for the mother to recover. They will literally take the baby away to feed it so that you can rest. It's almost a bit like there's a medical, but also a spa-like element to it. So just the fact that they have these, and I've heard about these hotels, also in China, I believe, as well, just shows you the different ways that countries treat the postnatal period or postpartum period. We talked briefly about our own mother's experience in the UK when they had us.
Yeah. 40 years ago, right? Where in UK, actually, women were allowed.
Around that time.
Were allowed to rest after having a baby.
Yeah, well, it's just very different. The economics and the population is a very different state. Yeah, women that had normal births, normal inverted commas, would stay for 5 or 6 days. And now just the capacity doesn't allow that, where if you had a normal birth, we have to get you up because that bed is in demand. So it's more just a reflection on the state of affairs today, and therefore probably a greater need to prepare more in advance if you are expecting a baby for that postnatal period.
That's right.
How are you cared for? But you also talked about what you've seen, and tell me a bit about what was
what I've known like in Southeast Asia is that in Taiwan they have like confinement centers, but they're done like almost like a hotel. So yeah, women move in for a month with their babies without their partners or any other family members, and they check into. They will look after the babies themselves, but they have meals delivered to them, 3 meals a day, all nutritionists, all based on traditional Chinese medicine of balancing the body. And so they have that. In Hong Kong, they've actually started to kind of have these high-end, luxurious confinement hotels as well now. That's starting to build up, and I'm seeing that in Hong Kong on social media a lot. And it is literally checking. It's no different to checking yourself into a 5-star spa hotel, but you're with your baby and you've got nurses and doctors on hand to kind of help you out when you need their kind of expertise as well. But the main focus is that you're in there on postnatal bandaging to kind of make your tummy go smaller and better. I mean, like and for the skin to kind of recover better from the birthing and from expanding. And so that's like the spa element of it. And then your food is delivered as in like room service in a hotel. So that's done. So you can book this kind of service now in Hong Kong, as well as we talked about earlier on in the other episode, where you can have confinement nannies that you book and they come to your house. They stay overnight with you for the entire month that you book them out for, or you can get daytime nannies, confinement nannies, that come in and just do the cooking for you and your family, but they don't stay overnight and they come back again the next day to do the same thing again. In Singapore and Malaysia, I do know they confinement meal delivery service is very much part of the norm. I don't know if you can book confinement nannies, but I'm sure you probably can, because the confinement business is such a big thing in Asia. But it's just that all these different countries in Asia combined, they all have different services and offerings for confinement, whereas in UK there are some confinement nannies in UK, but they are extremely hard to find. And it is always, I always see on forums where people in UK are always asking, does anyone know a confinement nanny that lives in Birmingham? Does anyone that know one that lives in London? And generally everyone's always like, no, there's not much.
There are kind of 3 options that you could do. And you can walk through
depending
those
on your budget, right?
Depending on budget. So
Yes.
what are those 3
So
things?
anyone
in
can
the UK?
do confinement, given the restrictions that we have in the UK. Now, your budget free of all costs, really, to do it yourself, is to batch cook and freeze. Now, you can batch cook and freeze using free recipes from my blog, or if you do your own research and look up confinement recipes, what sort of food you can eat. If you plan in advance, you can batch cook these things, put them in your freezer by day, and you've got really nutritious meals that are based on the confinement principle.
Yep.
That you've cooked yourself, you've prepared yourself, and that doesn't cost you anything. But what it will cost you is time and preparation in advance.
And a food cost.
And of course, the cost of food, of course. But it's the cheapest way you'll be able to do
Yes,
confinement.
of course.
And you will be paying for food costs anyway,
Yep,
right?
yep.
Right? Okay.
Okay.
So then your second sort of option would be to come to someone like me who offers a meal delivery service of the food. So, that will cost a bit of money, but if you've budgeted and planned for it and feel like this is something that you want to do, it's an investment into your future, your health and your vitality. So that's the second option, where you can book a meal service for confinement. And the third one, probably being the most expensive and extravagant one, is to book a doula who can come and help, like a maternity postnatal, to kind of help look after you if you don't have family to kind of do that for you.
Yep.
And they could possibly cook you the confinement meals as well. So that would be your sort of more like top of the range kind of option here in UK. And this is something that you would have to budget a lot more for.
Cool. So that hopefully gives some practical ideas for people that might want to consider this. And again,
Yes.
do your own research, come to your own conclusions about whether this is right for you. But again, this is more just highlighting different practices that are happening around the world and what can be open to you. So let's dive into a couple of these fundamental concepts or beliefs that surround or that are the foundations for confinement food. And we touched upon this in the first episode. So one central idea is this idea of balance. And you mentioned that when there's trauma to the body, such as childbirth, your body goes into a cold state. And there are certain foods that are believed to be more cold, more hot, that then create a sense of balance. So let's talk about what those foods are and what is the belief behind them, and then how do they work together to create balance?
So foods are kind of, according to traditional Chinese medicine, which is TCM for short, is that foods belong in the cooling elements. They're either in a cool state, a neutral state, or a heaty state. Now, because our bodies are in a cool state once we've given birth and we've had a baby, we don't have more cold food because it makes our bodies even cooler. So
we don't need that. Yeah.
So you don't need any foods that are cold. So what you do need are neutral foods and warming foods. But the warming food, we can get onto a scale of too warm. So we kind of stick to foods that are like more neutral and the lesser warm, if you like. So it's like a gentle warming to the body. Things like ginger will warm up the body. Things like raw salads are very cold for the body. And the general belief in traditional Chinese medicine is to not have anything cold to eat or drink and nothing raw. So we wouldn't eat things like sushi, salad. We don't drink cold drinks during this time. Things like yogurt, cereal with cold milk are a no-no. But cereal with warmed up milk, that would be okay, because the state of the food is not in a cold state. It's in a neutral state once you've warmed it up. So, that sort of stuff is like, it is sticking to kind of warm or hot food and drink.
Okay.
So that's kind of like the kind of the physical side of it, whether you're having cold or cold or hot food and drinks, but you've got certain foods with the actual warming properties. So ginger is warming. Things like pork and chicken, they are considered also warming. Certain vegetables are warming. Certain vegetables are far too cool, so you can't have. So something like pak choi, you can't really have because it's too cold. Things like radish and tofu are all too cold for the body. So during your confinement time, you wouldn't have this sort of food. But things like lotus root, sweet potato, and squash, these are the more warming vegetables. So you can, or neutral vegetables. So you can have those. And things like broccoli, you can also have. But again, you wouldn't be able to have, say, raw broccoli, if you like that anyway, in a salad. If it was cooked and it's warmed up, then you'll find to have it becomes a neutral food. Now, food that is overly heaty that you're not supposed to have is because it can cause like things like inflammation. So things like lamb and beef are not usually eaten during confinement because they are believed to be too warming to the body, and it's too heaty. So we avoid those foods for now as we're healing. So I can take you through like, what sort of meals you can have. But also we have during the confinement period, traditionally confinement periods should last for 40 days. But because in the very modern world that we live in and people needing just to get back into, things when they can, most modern families and women will basically stick to a 1 month confinement period of 4 weeks. And in that 4 weeks, we divide the kind of food into the first 2 weeks and the last 2 weeks. Now, the first 2 weeks, we focus on foods that are very, very easy to digest. So the less your body has to work on digesting food, the more energy it has to go into healing. Your immune system just has more energy to direct the energy to your trauma sites. And then now the last 2 weeks of confinement, all your birthing wounds that should have healed by then. And then what we go into what we call a replenishing and restorative kind of phase. So all of the things that you've lost during pregnancy and the actual birthing, such as like you would have lost a lot of blood, you would have lost collagen, your own collagen, because you need collagen to make your own baby. These are the things that we focus on replenishing once your body has stopped bleeding and it's actually recovered from the actual birth wounds. So, confinement is kind of split into two halves like that. So the food that we can kind of focus eating on the first 2 weeks, it all needs to be low salt, low sugar, because sugar causes inflammation. So we don't want any more of that. And it's also low oil because oil is very hard to digest. So it feels very restrictive, but when we focus on what we are eating to restore our bodies, it doesn't feel as restrictive anymore because you're just trying to work with the foods that introduce a lot of goodness back into your body. So we will have things like rice is believed to warm the stomach and the spleen and creates warm energy in the body. So rice is very important for lunch and dinner during confinement. Personally, I found it quite difficult to do rice for both meals. So I would have something like hot noodles, but just boiled noodles, boiled wheat noodles that have no fat in them. So maybe for lunch, I'd have like noodles with some proteins and veg. But for dinner time, it would be always rice. So because rice kind of warms up the body. And then the proteins that we stick to are certain fish. And then it's generally pork and chicken, lean pork and chicken. If you want to eat the fats, like the skin from chicken, that's absolutely fine as well because mums need the energy from that sort of stuff, and they can digest a small amount. So
it's interesting because there's some parts, some of the things you mentioned do make sense, and some things that I stick in my mind. I think, that wouldn't occur to me as someone that hasn't been through this stuff. It does make sense to me that you would have things that are easy on your digestion. That just makes common sense to me. And what you described as low sugar, no fried stuff, that just seems as a healthy diet.
Yes.
So I don't think I could disagree with that. The one around rice is interesting because when I looked at my diet, so I had a rice heavy diet growing up. Now, obviously I'm not a pregnant woman either, but they talk about, white rice is always highlighted as, carb heavy, etc. So again, it's more just looking at, there are some things that you talk about, but I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And I think no one from following, a healthy diet would disagree that you don't want to have too much sugar or too much oil. The other thing that struck me, and we've talked about this, is when you talk about the cold versus the hot. Now, this was a philosophy that was born out of traditional Chinese medicine many thousands of years ago.
That's right, yeah.
But that has shown up in different ways. And you mentioned this to me, but just the idea of pH balance. And we talk about in healthy diets, the balance between acidity and alkaline, which I thought was really, so that philosophy has shown up in a different way.
Yes, it seems more we can explain it more using Western science that we're obviously more accustomed to. And it is interesting because I remember when I first looked at, being told about the balance, the yin and yang balance. It's very important in Chinese medicine. Not too cold, not too hot, and you're in the neutral somewhere. So it's all to do with balancing the yin yang. So to me, at the time when I was growing up and hearing all this, it didn't make any sense to me. I was like, what is balancing of the yin and yang? And then I remember Googling and really trying to find information from a Western scientific point of view years ago. And I did stumble across that actually it has been shown or proven, if you like, that actually the hot and the cold can be explained like the pH balance. If you're too acidic, you're too hot. If you're too alkaline, then you're too cold. And actually we need a pH balance of 7. And that's where traditional Chinese medicine will say you're neutral. And this is your optimum
balance.
So this is your balance. And it makes a lot of sense when, for me, anyway, that there's a scientific explanation for this, and it's not just talking about your qi, your yin and yang, the pH balance and the alkaline acidic made a lot more sense to me. So if you can think of it and vision that for yourself, then this is where the principle is born. So maybe in ancient China they had a way and they knew, but it wasn't explained in a way that I think us modern beings can really understand and digest.
I'd say it's more of an intuitive sense or lived sense, but now we have some elements that
we can back.
There is some overlap. But you talked a bit about the first 2 weeks. And let's talk about some specific recipes that you're cooking now, or foods that you're cooking in those first 2 weeks, which you said was more the recovery, easy digestion, easier on so to help you heal, versus the restorative elements in the last 2 weeks.
That's right.
Let's talk about the differences.
So the difference in the recipes that I would cook for my customers is in the first week you would have throughout the 4 weeks you have rice. Rice is like a non-negotiable. It warms up your stomach, it warms up your spleen, and the spleen is very important in traditional Chinese medicine, although it's something that's not really considered here. So the foods that we would have in the first 2 weeks would be things like steamed chicken with ginger and spring onion. Literally just plain steamed. I do add things like sesame oil in there because sesame oil creates warmth in the body. The spring onion and ginger also creates warmth in the body, but not too much at this stage because ginger is a very important ingredient in confinement cooking. But ginger, circulates blood and it warms up the body. But too much circulation of blood in the first 2 weeks is not good because a woman is still actively bleeding for about 2 weeks after giving birth. So generally we say you can have ginger, but not lots and lots of it yet, because we're just trying to create a warming balance. We will have things like steamed pork patties. So steamed pork patties are things like pork mince, and I'll add things like goji berries to it and some cordyceps mushrooms. And cordyceps mushrooms and the goji berries are high in antioxidants. They are considered neutral. So they're not too hot, they're not too cold. It's a neutral food. The pork is neutral itself. The chicken I mentioned was neutral itself. Ginger and spring onion, they're warming, but not overly heaty. So we would have those kind of dishes in the beginning. And lightly stir-fried dishes are okay as well. So the first week I also do like a lightly stir-fried pork and green peppers and stir-fry with black pepper. These are all like warming sort of elements. Pepper, if you ate it raw, would be too cold for your body, but stir-fried in a dish, it becomes warm. So so those are the foods that you can eat during the first 2 weeks, and you would have vegetables alongside that. And actually, there's a misconception that during confinement, you're not allowed vegetables. It is not true. So my parents have said to me, you can't really eat vegetables. Anything like pak choy, any leafy greens, they're all too cold, you can't have them. It's actually not true. And when I looked at the actual TCM research that I did with my sister-in-law, you can have it, but it has to be cooked and quite well cooked. So we don't serve al dente during this time. All the vegetables have to be quite well cooked, as if you're serving someone who doesn't have teeth. But it kind of helps with digestion as well,
I get that.
Because when food is cooked down really well, it's easy to digest, and then it becomes that warming sort of neutral kind of nature. What we then cook is you still get elements of the of some of what we get in the first 2 weeks, because those things are still work, but I would add more ginger to it. The steamed pork patty changes from steamed pork patty with goji berries and cordyceps mushrooms to red dates and Chinese mushrooms. Red dates help replenish blood. But again, we don't eat red dates until you stop bleeding. So when you're actively bleeding, red date is not so much of a good option, but you can have lots and lots of it once you stop bleeding, because it helps you replenish lost blood that you would have had when you've had a baby. And then again, the vegetables are very similar. Still have to cook them until they're very easy to digest. So digestion is still an important element, even into week 2. The second half of the confinement. And then we have 2 very signature confinement dishes that we will have during the last 2 weeks when your body's into more restorative mode. One is pork trotters with vinegar and ginger, which we've talked about. Now, the sweet vinegar that the trotters are cooked in are full of like amino acids, and it helps with kind of like your energy levels. It can help with blood circulation and replenishing your blood yet again. The ginger, you get a lot of ginger in this dish because the ginger at this point now drives a lot of the cold wind from your body, and you're able to have a lot of this. So how I understand it is that ginger creates warmth in the body and it circulates the blood. So as it does that, it drives all the coldness away from your body. But you can't have too much ginger whilst you're actively bleeding. So once you stop bleeding, this is when you kind of like, you're able to have the
ginger overdrive.
The lots and lots of ginger, lots and lots of ginger. And then the trotters is the thing that can make people squeamish, and even a lot of my Asian clients or even my friends and family, I do know people who won't eat them because they also don't like the texture of them. But pork trotters, why they were always used was because it's very high in collagen, so it replenishes all the collagen that you've lost once you've made your baby. And also the way a trotter is made up, it doesn't disintegrate and get hard in the sweet vinegar that is very, very high in amino acid, right? So I've actually helped customers where they've said, oh look, I don't eat trotters, can I replace it with chicken and pork? I've done that before, and the vinegar really toughens the meat. So actually the fat and the skin on the trotters actually remain very supple in vinegar, whereas like meat actually starts to get very, very hard from that. So anyway, so I guess there was always a reason why this dish is a signature confinement dish. And then another signature confinement dish is called chicken in ginger wine. So it's chicken cooked in lots and lots of sliced ginger. So by this time you're having a lot of ginger. This is sliced. It's cooked together with chicken, and then it's a fermented glutinous rice wine. The fermented glutinous rice wine is supposed to kind of help your qi, and it's supposed to again replenish your blood and just really bring some nutrient packs into your body, all the things that you've lost during birthing. I'm not 100% sure what it is, but it's something that creates a lot of warmth in your body. And this is the properties of glutinous rice wine. So this is what you have in the last 2 weeks. Now, during all this time, what I haven't mentioned yet is that you actually have soups, and the soups are also very important. So you would have a daily soup, and the soup then also changes from the first 2 weeks to the last 2 weeks. Last 2 weeks soups being more like Chinese medicinal ones that help with replenishing, blood and just getting your qi back up again. First 2 weeks worth of soups are actually just very easy to digest soups without too many things that will cause inflammation in them. The soup also helps with things like breastfeeding because you are introducing a lot more liquids into your diet. But you've got, I always call Chinese soup, which is very watery. I call it vitamin water. It's very watery. It looks like water, but there is packed with nutrients in there. So we have a lot of this during the whole confinement, and it helps with breastfeeding as well.
Nice. I'm so hungry.
Oh wow!
I remember eating so many. So I piggybacked off of so we were lucky that my mother-in-law cooked a lot for my wife, and it just made sense that we eat the same food as well. So I ended up, I remember eating lots of pig trotters.
Were you a fan of it though?
Wasn't for me. But it wasn't bad, but it was, it just, after a while, it's a certain texture. But again, everyone has different tastes.
Yes. So not everyone likes this trotter. It's very much a bit, it's a marmite. You either love it or you hate it. I, on the other hand, absolutely love it, and I can't get enough of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it.
Well, what I can't disagree with is the idea that a new mother any mother will benefit from support. And what's interesting is, you talk about obviously the benefits of someone cooking nutrition-rich food for you.
Yeah.
But I think the other benefits of just the idea of confinement is there's a social interaction, because a lot of new mothers talk about isolation, new parents where, you're celebrated, you've got this new baby, everyone comes around, you have this big kind of celebration, and then all of a sudden you're left because everyone has to go back to their jobs and their lives. But just someone coming in on a regular basis to kind of just have a chat, forget the nutrition aside, just the social value of confinement
and feeling supported.
Exactly. Whether that's, if it happens, if you're lucky to have a family member or friend to do that, but just this idea of, again, we all know that there'll be value to being surrounded by loved ones in that period where you're just recovering. Number one. And then number two is just, again, that pre-planning where you have extra support around the house, because we do live in an age now where, as you said, the expectation is you will typically have two working parents. You may or may not have, financial support from your business, maybe not, but you might have statutory, maternity pay, and that looks very different. And so the need to go back to work and start earning again for the mothers and for fathers, maybe much more than it used to be, where maybe it was more feasible to live off one person's salary.
And I definitely feel like it's been harder for families since, the cost of living in the UK. It's very, very difficult now.
Just look at what proportion of your paycheck goes on food, and the cost of food has gone up, over it, etc. So I think it's also a reflection on how that's changed. But I don't think anyone would disagree with the idea that having social support from someone that loves you, extra help at a critical time when you particularly need it, and an expectation that a new mother wouldn't be doing all the cooking and cleaning and support for the kids, etc., whilst having to worry about going back to work after it. That's never going to be a healthy thing. So I think we're just highlighting there are just basic, when you stop to think about it, because also the other thing is that it's such a blur, the pregnancy, the birth, and then everything that happens afterwards, that you rarely get a chance to sit back and say, what should I be doing? And do I have the option to make those choices? Like, do I have the choice that my mom's nearby or not? Maybe not. Do I have the choice to pay for a doula, or is it maybe not? So it's having those earlier conversations when you can, when you're a bit more rested, maybe before you've had the baby, where you can make some of these decisions in advance to say, what would we like that after birth experience to look like? As opposed to, again, for us in our first, which is like, we'll worry about that afterwards. But then there's no chance to worry about that. No. And I think it's more just highlighting how is it you would ideally like to come into? And obviously you can never predict what kind of birth you're going to have, what kind of baby you're going to have, So it's trying to mitigate all those unknowns that you won't know, or for things that you can control for, which is how much time would I like, if ideally, who do I have around me? What can I manufacture? How much budget to put aside? So I think those are all going to be healthy things that you want to do, and then go into your own practice and do your own research to say, do I want to follow
and actually there are things that you can actually do for free. It does require planning, but with enough preparation, you can get things and do things for free. Like we've touched on, if you were to batch cook confinement meals yourself, that's no different to batch cooking any food in advance. It's grocery shopping bill that you would have had to spend on anyway. And through my amazing doula who did look after me, she says that the Doula Services UK, I think it might be like doulas.co.uk, they do offer people who are very, like on low income families, they do offer free doula services as well.
Oh, really?
It's something, yes, I didn't know that either, but apparently there are doulas I think volunteer some free hours, everyone, just so that someone can get a bit of care. It might not be consistent care, but for those who are low income families or struggling a little bit, there are doulas who are willing to work for much lower rates, or they do offer, like 3 hours. There is something on I think the doula guide and directories for UK. So that's always good to know. There are some, so as I said, there are free services. You do have to do a bit of digging, you have to do a bit of research, but free things can be done. And it doesn't and to actually have the confinement period doesn't need to cost you a lot of money, but you do have to be prepared, do your research beforehand, have a plan in place, and it can be done within budget.
Awesome. So hopefully that's a bit of inspiration or food for thought for people listening in.
I will say that some desserts are allowed during the confinement diet, but
Yeah.
there are actually Chinese desserts that are allowed on this diet. So if you're thinking, oh, I can't stick to it. I mean, I do want to share a bit that I, on my own personal journey, even though I did the confinement diet, I wasn't 100% strict on it because I felt like I needed to do things that worked for me.
Exactly.
So like I said, I didn't follow fully the whole like eating rice for 2 meals a day. And actually I needed cereal and bread in the morning. So I would have that, but make sure it was warmed up. If I really needed a bar of chocolate, even though I shouldn't have, and a bag of crisps, I would have it, but then I'd be back on my confinement. And during the time that I was on my confinement, my bowel movements have never been so good. I felt so well within because I was sticking generally to a very good diet. So even though I had these kind of little snack attacks and I kind of went straight for them sort of thing, I generally stuck to quite a good confinement diet for I think I actually she was on it for about 6 weeks, and I felt really, really well in myself. We did have something that we didn't cover yet. It's the confinement practices that that is kind of sort of like believed in as well. Whether you believe in that or not, again, I wasn't strict on it myself, but generally people do know that you're not supposed to wash your hair during confinement. So for the whole month, you're not supposed to wash your hair or have a bath. And the reason is because
Or have a bath.
or even have a bath, because tap water or water directly from the taps, even if it's hot, the Chinese believe it contains a lot of wind, and wind means cold. So if your body's already cold, you're introducing more cold into your body. But there is a way around it, which is you have to boil your own water in a massive pot with lots and lots of ginger. So you boil loads and loads of ginger water, you let it cool down, and you use that to wash your hair and bathe with.
Interesting.
So you can do that. So my own personal practice is when I did do this with my second born was that I ended up washing my hair every 4 days. I think I got to about the 4th day and I was like, oh, I can't do a whole month of this.
Nice.
Really, actually, it messed with my mental health. Like when I just had an itchy head and I just couldn't do it. So I think about 4 or 5 days in, I'll be like, no, I'm washing my hair, but I'll get the boiled ginger water. So my doula was great at just boiling a massive pan for me. And luckily I had big pots at home. Boil it, let it cool down. Then I'd kind of go and wash with it. Then I would wash down with it. On days that I wasn't bathing, I would wring a towel in the hot, but cooled down ginger water with a towel and do a wipe down. And generally, because I wasn't really moving, I didn't really feel like I needed a bath as well, because I was kind of resting as much as I could, staying in bed, but I was walking around to get my blood circulation going. So but it was very gentle walking around in the house, resting, sitting down whilst I could. So because I wasn't really being that active anyway, a wipe down every 2 days, and then every 2 days or so was fine. And then I would have a ginger bath or a ginger kind of ladle over myself in the shower sort of thing in the every 3 to 4 days. So that's the thing that you're supposed to do during confinement, and you're not supposed to actually wash your hair or bath for the whole month. I couldn't do it, so I did do a bit of picking and choosing, which I believe is okay, because I'm still washing with the ginger water, which is supposed to bring water back into your body. And as soon as I've washed my hair, it is dry your hair straight away, because otherwise the cold will enter through your head. And also, you're never ever supposed to be barefooted during your confinement month. So it is always wearing socks. If you have to leave the house for such as like doctor's appointments with your baby, which I had to in the middle of winter for my second born, I was well wrapped up. I would always have a scarf on. I would have a woolly hat on. I would have socks on, like no exposed skin except for my face. But even then, I try and cover the scarf right up to my face as much as possible. So it's all these things to try and not allow extra cold to get into your body. So this is something that is also practiced as part of the confinement practice, food being a big part, but this as well. And some people don't follow this, and I do know that they just go out to the parks anyway because they people do get cabin fever. You want to go out for a bit of fresh air. So I think do what you will that will work for your own mental health and sanity, but just wrap up if you do go out.
And I think what we're highlighting here is do what works for you. Do your own research, come to your own conclusions. I personally would recommend having a bath, but again, do what works for you. And I think your point around mental health is the important one there, which is some of these practices or beliefs, they will come with good intent, and again, do what you believe in, do your own research, see what works for you, but ultimately it's making something that will make you happy, healthier and stronger.
And we all now know that mental health really impacts the way we develop as a person, and our everyday lives. Our mental health is important. For me, washing my hair, made a difference to how I felt.
Yeah.
So I did it, but I followed the practice of using hot ginger water to wash my
Yeah.
hair instead of water directly from the tap.
Yeah.
So you can pick and mix.
And some of these practices would have been developed for the time that they had been developed.
Yes.
As you said, we don't live in rural China 1,000 years ago.
With a village to help you.
So those practices would have probably made sense at that time. But because we live in a different age now, what used to be traditions that have never been questioned may not have relevance because of the world we live in today.
Back then, they never had hairdryers. We have hairdryers now, so that as long as you dry your hair quick, right after it's been wet, you won't have any more cold in your head.
Yeah.
So things like that.
And that's where I think, certainly from a cultural perspective, some of the beliefs, I know plenty of friends and family where in times of uncertainty, they will follow things dogmatically, like mum said do this or auntie said do that, and you follow it almost a bit blindly. Or
you go the other way and you don't want to follow it, and you kind of get very frustrated by not understanding why you have to do these things.
And so from personal experience, what I would highlight is taking some of these things with a pinch of salt. Again, doing your research, coming to your own conclusions, they will come with the best of intent, right? But they can come, when it comes to restrictive, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't eat this. And so I think it's for you as the mother to take a healthy look at that. And again, understand where it's coming from. For me personally, I think it makes sense that you would have easy to digest food. It makes sense that you would look to restore certain resources that you may have lost as a mother. So that makes sense to me. But to form your own conclusions and to then follow that accordingly. They're saying if you don't like not bathing for a month, then have a bath, right? But this has been great. I think hopefully there's some really good food for thought for anyone listening in that hasn't ever heard of this. To maybe have a look and see what they think. So
there's no harm in trying something, but yes, do your research first. If it makes sense to you, there is no harm in trying something that is supposed to protect your vitality into older age, and it has been practiced for thousands and thousands of years. And even all my clients now, they're younger than what I am now, and I'm surprised that actually so many of them are so willing and forthcoming in wanting to do this themselves. They're finding me, they're reaching out within their own resources to go and find someone who does confinement practice, and they're willing to spend the money on the service because they believe in it. Whether it's confinement or wellness or health in general, everyone is more health conscious. Everyone wants to give things a go before they say no. And this is just another one of those practices that, if you can, give it a go, see if it works for you. There is no harm in this. Do what feels right for you. You don't have to follow the whole practice. But if you only want to follow the food element of it, then so be it, just follow the food element. Because, having food that's restorative for your body is not a bad thing.
Awesome. Thank you, Lucy. And the last one, it's, what's your handle? It's
so you can find me on Instagram, Lucy Loves to Eat. And I have a blog sharing free recipes for the confinement meals at www.lucylovetoeat.com.
Perfect.